What did the world look like before the Great Flood? The Antediluvian period, a term derived from the Latin words ante, meaning before, and diluvium, meaning flood, refers to a time in ancient history before the Great Flood, as described in the book of Genesis in the Bible. A mysterious world, a somewhat unknown lifestyle, creatures that no longer exist, people who live hundreds of years, giants that are said to have roamed the earth. These all describe an era that sparks the curiosity of many. But did this really happen? And before the biblical flood washed away the old world to birth a new one, what was life really like? How could humans have lived for hundreds of years? Were humans more spiritually advanced during this time? And what kind of wisdom was lost in the flood? We'll find out in the new episode of Secret Origins. Welcome! Flood myths are a prevailing theme in global mythologies, often serving as cautionary tales or explanations for the origins of civilization. In Mesopotamian legends, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic, characters like Utnapishtim and Atrahasis are warned by the gods to build boats to escape catastrophic deluges. A similar story exists in the Hindu mythology, where Manu receives a divine warning from a fish, an avatar of the god Vishnu. Greek mythology offers the tale of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survive a flood sent by Zeus and repopulate the earth through a unique ritual involving stones. In Native American Hopi tradition, the deity Sotugnak orchestrates a flood, sparing only the faithful who are led underground by the ant people. But what was it like before the global flood described in myths around the world? Accounts of Antediluvian period often describe a landscape dramatically different from today's. Biblical texts and similar accounts in other cultures often portray the earth as an idyllic, fertile paradise. It was a time when humanity was relatively new and, according to some interpretations, possessed knowledge or abilities that have since been lost. The land was often described as lush and fertile, filled with abundant resources that made for an easy life compared to the hardships that would follow after the flood. The descriptions of the world before the flood vary across different mythological traditions, but there are some common themes. Interestingly, in many myths, the period before the flood is often marked by moral or social decay, disobedience, or some form of imbalance that prompts divine intervention. For example, in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic from Mesopotamia, the gods decide to flood the earth because humans have become too noisy and disruptive, disturbing the divine order. Similarly, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Bible records of the Antediluvian period in the first chapters of the book of Genesis. According to them, in the pre-diluvian era, human civilization achieved great accomplishments, but also created a culture of sin. Native American Hopi tradition suggests that people had turned away from the path of spiritual balance, focusing too much on materialistic gain. According to Chinese folklore, the pre-flood world was a place of chaos, filled with suffering because the rivers had overflowed their banks and inundated the land. In African and Mesoamerican myths, like those of Tutsi and the Aztecs, the world before the flood was often a place of excess population in need of cleansing. So, what was life like for people at that time? What did they do? Obviously, the first antediluvian family as described in the Bible was the family of Adam. After being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve settled and had sons and daughters. As we know, the first son of the first couple was Cain, but Cain was also the first murderer of the antediluvian world. He brutally killed Abel, his own brother. After his terrible sin, Cain received a mark from God and built a city in the land of Nod. Cain named this city after his first son, Enoch. This antediluvian city is the first city mentioned in the Bible. In the Sumerian creation myths, this city is known as Eridu. The Bible tells us that humans were created by God with the ability to think and make moral choices. Unlike what some scientific theories suggest, people didn't go through an evolutionary process to become who they are. This becomes very clear when we look at the biblical accounts of the Antediluvian period. As mentioned, Cain, the first human being to be born on earth, was developed enough to build a city. His descendants in turn were responsible for great inventions. With Jubal and Tubal-Cain, antediluvian society learned to live in tents, to breed herds of cattle, to develop the arts with the use of musical instruments, and to forge tools through working with copper and iron. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Later in Noah's time, the Bible shows how he already had the capacity and the necessary resources to build a large ark according to divine instructions. Therefore, although the Bible does not provide many details about this period, it is clear that there was strong technological and cultural development in the antediluvian world. Many people wonder about the duration of the pre-flood era, but the Bible remains silent on this issue. However, numerous scholars suggest that the time span from the world's creation to the flood might have been longer than the remainder of biblical history. Attempts have been made to date this period, but without reaching a conclusion. In fact, the only source providing any chronological information about the pre-flood era is the genealogical list in Genesis chapter 5. Surprisingly, these stories from this period often feature larger-than-life characters, some of whom are said to have lived for hundreds of years. One of the most notable figures from the Judeo-Christian tradition is Methuselah, known for his remarkably long lifespan. He was the son of Enoch and the grandfather of Noah, and he is primarily known for his astonishingly long lifespan of 969 years. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived after the birth of Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. But he is not the only one who lived for so long. Here are some more quotes from the Bible. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived in total of 930 years, and then he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. After he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more because God took him away. Based on the family tree data in Genesis chapter 5, we can see that people back then lived for a very long time, varying from 800 to 300 years. Is it possible that because they lived so long, they had plenty of time to learn new things and make progress in technology and other areas? Most Christians believe that these people really did live for hundreds of years, just like the Bible says. But the question is, how was it possible? Some scholars and theologians argue that extreme ages of the antediluvian figures could be symbolic, perhaps emphasizing their divine favor or wisdom. Others speculate on a different environmental context that could have supported longer human lifespans, and in fact the answer might be in the Bible itself. In other cultures too, there are tales of kings and sages who lived for centuries, imparting wisdom and guiding their people. In Mesopotamian tradition, figures like Utnapishtim were considered wise and God-favored humans who survived the deluge. According to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods decide to send a flood to wipe out humanity, but Utnapishtim is forewarned by god Ea and builds a massive boat to save himself, his family, and all animals. After surviving the deluge, he and his wife are granted immortality by the gods. Sumerian king lists, perhaps one of the most important ancient texts, perfectly describes a time in history before the flood where god kings ruled for thousands of years. One of the most interesting details about this Sumerian king list is the fact that the earliest list describes 8 kings who ruled the earth for a total of 241,000 years, with the original authority said to have come down from heaven until the time of the Great Flood that swept away mankind, and after it once again royal authority was cast down from heaven. Here is a part of the king's list. After the power came down from heaven, it was in Eridu Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Al-Jar ruled for 36,000 years, and after him there are 2 kings. They ruled for 64,800 years. Just note that we're not talking about hundreds but thousands of years here. Many myths suggest a closer relationship between humans and gods, or even direct interaction and intermingling. According to the Bible, in the time before the flood, 2 main lineages represented the spiritual divide among humanity: the godly lineage of Seth and the ungodly lineage of Cain, the first son of Adam, who killed his own brother and thus committed the first murder. The Sethites were considered the keepers of godliness, a group that valued and upheld their relationship with God. Unfortunately, as this lineage mixed with the descendants of Cain, who were not God-fearing, a spiritual decay set in that became unbearable. It was like mixing water with oil. The two could not coexist peacefully, and the end result was a society increasingly moving away from God. But even in this dark period, there were bright spots of spirituality. Abel was one such figure. His sincere offering to God made him a symbol of faithfulness, and he became the world's first martyr. His example of devotion was so impactful that it was still being talked about in New Testament times. Enoch was another remarkable individual. He was so close to God, walking in constant communion with Him, that he was said to have been taken up by God, bypassing death entirely. But what is more interesting is that during this period, the Bible speaks of enigmatic figures known as the Nephilim. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. Is it possible that this is the answer to the mystery with the long lifespan of certain biblical figures? In the book of Enoch, the Nephilim are closely linked to the Watchers, who are fallen angels that descended to earth and mated with human women. According to this text, these celestial beings taught mankind various forms of knowledge that were considered forbidden, ranging from astrology and divination to metallurgy. Their offspring with human women were the Nephilim, described as giants who were violent and corrupt, consuming all they encountered. Here is a notable passage from the book of Enoch, chapters 6 to 7. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose our wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And they became pregnant, and they bore great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. The book of Enoch thus elaborates on the cryptic passages in Genesis by offering a much more detailed account of the Nephilim and the Watchers, casting them as figures of corruption and attributing to them much of the wickedness that eventually led to the Great Flood. But these giants were not only wicked, as they also helped humanity. One of the central themes in the book of Enoch is the imparting of forbidden knowledge to humans. The Watchers are said to have taught humanity various forms of knowledge that were intended to remain celestial secrets. This includes the arts of weapon making, divination, astrology, and other practices considered sinful or disruptive to the natural order. In chapter 8, it is mentioned, moreover, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the fabrication of mirrors, and the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrows, the use of stones of every valuable and select kind, and of all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered. The book also elaborates on the violence and moral corruption that overwhelmed the earth due to the influence of the Watchers and their offspring. In chapter 7 it states, "Then they took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees. And they conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was each 300 cubits. These devoured all with the labor of man produced, until it became impossible to feed them, when they turned themselves against man in order to devour them, and began to endure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood." According to Enoch, the moral and spiritual degradation reached such a level that divine intervention became necessary, culminating in the Great Flood as described in biblical account in Genesis. In Greek mythology, there's a similar figure to Enoch named Prometheus. Now, Prometheus, a titan, defied gods by stealing fire and giving it to humanity, symbolizing his role as a benefactor and a bringer of knowledge. This act of challenging the gods and bestowing wisdom on humans echoes the Watcher's actions in the Book of Enoch. This suggests that tales of divine beings interacting with humans before the flood, sharing forbidden knowledge, and suffering consequences for their transgressions are common across different mythologies. Greek mythology is also full of giants, powerful and monstrous beings who fought against the gods. Similarly, in the Book of Enoch and Genesis 6, we see giants created when divine beings mate with human women. Though we can't find a direct birth story of a god and a mortal woman creating giants, the character Gilgamesh from the Mesopotamian epos, who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, seems to hint at a common theme. In the Sumerian mythology, there are also stories of heavenly beings that came to earth and communicated with humans, but they're called the Anunnaki. However, unlike the Watchers, in Mesopotamian myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Anunnaki were said to have created humans as laborers and had interactions with them. According to Zecharia Sitchin's hypothesis, they came to Earth to mine gold and created humans to perform the task. This theory is controversial but provides evidence that the Anunnaki were the original creators of mankind. The Anunnaki claimed to have come from their planet Nibiru and could travel through stargates and wormholes. Zecharia Sitchin also claimed that the Sumerians learned astrology from the Anunnaki, which gave them a deep understanding of our solar system, including Venus and Saturn, and even depicted a 10th planet called Nibiru. Heroes like Abel, Enoch, and Noah emerged as beacons in a morally clouded world, each in his own way embodying the virtues that will later be rekindled in the post-flood civilization. It is this bright contrast that makes the antediluvian world an eternal subject of inquiry and reflection. Its end by cataclysmic flood isn't just an account of divine retribution, but a reminder of the cyclical nature of human experience. Like the sedimentary layers left behind by receding waters, the stories and lessons from this time have been compressed into the bedrock of our shared consciousness. They warn us of the perils of spiritual waywardness, while simultaneously inspiring for the untapped potentials of human endeavor. In this way, the antediluvian era serves as a cosmic mirror reflecting both the brilliance and the shadows of humanity. It proclaims a timeless message: though we may fall, there's always a chance for a new beginning. So as we navigate our own complexities and uncertainties, may we heed the wisdom echoing from this distant past, applying its lessons in our present to build a future that harmonizes both the wonders of human achievement and the nobility of spiritual purpose. We bow before you and thank you for watching another episode of Secret Origins. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again.